right, Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Chan Zurab. I'm the staff attorney at the Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE, Cleveland, Ohio, Cleveland and Northern Ohio chapter. With us today, we also have our interim executive director. If you want to introduce yourself. Thank you. We also have some information about some of our programs, as well as sign up volunteer sheets for you all if you're interested. Please also help yourself to the refreshments that we have. There's like muffins, there's also chips, juice, things like that. So please feel free to take them. And so we'll actually get started. I'll tell you a little bit about myself first. So my name is Chance, like I said. I'm a Black Palestinian. I graduated from Cleveland Heights. I then went to Kent State University and studied international relations. Following that, I went to law school at Cleveland State University, where I graduated last year. And just recently, I was admitted to practice law in Ohio after passing the bar. So that's just a little bit about myself. And then if you have any other questions beyond that, I also have my business cards up here that we can pass around later. You could also find me at the CARE office Monday through Friday as well. But we're going to go into this presentation. I'm going to try and keep it very simple for everyone, because I know sometimes a lot of the legal language can go over people's heads. So if there is something that just isn't clicking or it doesn't make sense, please just ask me to explain, and I'll try to explain it to the best of my ability. We're also going to try and have some skits for you and examples, so it's not just me talking this whole time. And hopefully you guys don't get bored of me. So, welcome to the Know Your Rights and Responsibilities by the CARE Cleveland and Northern Ohio chapter. So just a quick overview of what we're going to go over today. We're going to go over the Know Your Rights. So if law enforcement contacts you, if you're stopped by the police, what are your rights as an employee in your workplace? What to do when you're faced with job discrimination, public accommodations, and immigration status. So first of all, what kind of law enforcement officers may reach out to you and contact you? So these could be your state or local officers. Usually, I think we're in Cuyahoga Falls right now, so that would be the Cuyahoga Falls police, or it could be a state official, so a state trooper, things like that, as well as FBI agents, Homeland Security, ICE, immigrations and customs enforcement, customs and border authorities, drug enforcement, DEA, or this is not an exhaustive list, there may be a couple more. So, if you are contacted by law enforcement, always remember that you have a legal right to have an attorney present when speaking with law enforcement agencies. Even if you are not a citizen, this is true. You have a legal right to an attorney that is provided by the Fifth Amendment here. And one of the things that's very important to understand is refusing to answer their questions cannot be held against you if you decline to answer. It does not indicate that you may have done some type of wrongdoing. But the important thing to remember is if you answer a question incorrectly, or if you say one thing and then down the line you're being interviewed and you provide another type of answer that contradicts your previous answer, that can be held against you. So it's always best to speak with an attorney or have an attorney beside you before you're questioned. Going into the next slide. So like I was saying, you should never try to provide false information to any type of law enforcement agency. This is a crime if they know you're knowingly lying. I remember when I was at Kent State, we had a professor who was interviewed by the FBI. And during his interviews, they asked him if he had known an individual, and it turns out he said no, but down the line, it turns out that he did know that individual, and based on that, he was actually arrested, and then he was given a prison sentence based on his lying to a federal agent. So it's always best to tell the truth, and always best to ask whoever is visiting you for their business card. This way, you can get that contact information, their agency, and their name to your lawyer, or in the future if you're trying to gather who this person is that came. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. So we're kind of going to go into your Fourth Amendment rights, the rights that typically carry you during a search that a law enforcement agency will do, are your Fourth Amendment rights, and then your Fifth Amendment rights are once you have been arrested. So we'll get into those as well. So what is your Fourth Amendment? Literally, it is the police cannot do an unreasonable search and seizure, but what does that mean? That means that a warrant, so pretty much a document saying that they can search you, and it will say it has to be issued with probable cause, meaning that you are likely to have committed a crime, or there's some indication that you have committed a crime or that you are a suspect. And in the warrant, it must state with particularity, which means it needs to be specific. It can't just say, we're going to search Chance's house. It needs to say, we are searching Chance's apartment for drugs or for marijuana, things like that. It needs to state with specificity what they are looking for. They can't just say, we're going to look for food. I'm saying something random that is completely legal, but it can't just say food, because food in general is a very broad concept, if that makes sense. And so the example that we cited here was if the warrant says that you have stolen TVs, they can't look through your drawers, for example. Does that all make sense? And so, without a warrant, you do not need to permit them to enter your premises, your house, and you don't have to have them let them in. So, what you should do is always ask to see their warrant, even if they say, I could just go get one really quick. Always ask to see it. If they're claiming that they could get one, ask them to come back with one. If you consent to their search, they can go beyond what, if you let them into your house and consent, they could go beyond that and start searching your home. So I'm actually going to bring up our first volunteer, our intern, I'm sorry, and he's going to go over some of the exceptions to a warrant. But before that, I just want to pause and see if we have any questions. Yes. We're going to kind of go over some of the automobile exceptions that we have, and let's revisit that question after we go over that slide. Okay? Any other questions? Yes. So when you request an attorney, typically you might have an attorney previously, but it's always good if you have, the care number, or you have that kind of information where you can access it, because say they do take you to like downtown, then you would be able to place a phone call, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question? Perfect. Yes. Right. Yes. You can say that. Correct. Yes.
The rules applies to the airports, border crossing, the airports different.
We will go over that later. Yes.
Just going back, since we, let's say, a law enforcement, let's say, actually I locked the door, you can say that you would like to talk to them in presence of an attorney, so you don't have to talk to them. But if they produce a warrant for them to search your property, there's, I guess, no option for them not to allow them to search it.
If they do have a warrant, that means they have already been to the court and a judge has granted that, so they would have the ability to search your home.
Cannot make request or demand to have an attorney present that they have the right to just do it.
At that point, they would have the right to search your home, but if you are arrested and then they start asking you questions, that is when you could request an attorney. Does that make sense? So they would need probable cause. Probable cause means that there is like there's an indication that you have committed some type of crime, and usually when a police officer gets a warrant, they go to a judge or a magistrate, so they've been to the court, described what has happened, and then the judge is the one issuing that, the judge or the magistrate. And so after that, they have issued the warrant, and that's when they come to your house and say, hey, I'm going to search your home. This is the warrant because I suspect that you have stolen TVs in your home. Does that make sense?
You did this with your
Yes. You can request to read it, yes. And I would suggest that you do. So usually yes, because within the warrant, it will state what exactly they are searching for. It'll list your name, and it'll probably list your address on it too. Yes, I would request to look at it, and I would, because you want to confirm that they are in fact looking for the person named in the warrant. I'm not 100% if you're allowed to take pictures, but I would assume yes, just because you already have the ability to read it at that point. So I would assume that you would be allowed to take a picture of it. Yes. Yes. All right. I'm going to continue on for a little bit. Oh, yes. When you are not at the home, I'm about 85% sure that they are not allowed to search your home without you present. Yes. That's a high B. They would. So, the thing is we'll kind of get into this later. But if there is someone who lives at the house or manages the house, and they say your wife is home, for example, and the warrant is you're the person in the warrant. If your wife or someone else that lives there is like, oh, yes, you can go ahead, or someone who's responsible, then they could still go in. Does that make sense? All right. So we're going to go over a couple of the exceptions to the warrant requirement, and then if there's any other questions on these exceptions, I can go over and explain them. But we're going to have our intern explain a little bit.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I was just going to go over a few of the exceptions here real quick. Our first one is exceptions concerning search incident to a lawful arrest. And this is basically where it allows an officer to search person in any area within his wingspan. Thanks. Yeah. Sorry. I didn't want to move it. Police may also make a protective sweep of the area, and that includes passenger compartments of an automobile, but not a trunk. And then these must occur at the same time as the arrest. Okay. Then we also have the automobile exception. So I know a few people had questions about that. If there's probable cause to believe that the auto contains evidence of a crime, they're allowed to search it without warrant. And that includes the entire vehicle and any containers that might contain the object. And it does not have to be at the same time as the original stop. Okay. And then we also have plain view. And this is pretty simple. It's just basically police have to be legitimately on the premises. They have to discover evidence or contraband in plain view. And there is probable cause to believe that the item is evidence. So yeah. And then, let me just finish them up. Okay. We also have consent. So consent must be voluntary and intelligent. Any person with right to use or occupy the property may consent, and evidence can be used against other owners or occupants. So that's roommates, like we were talking about before, house, apartment, then we have like employers for an office. Yeah, sure. So basically, any person with the right to be on the premises or occupy it, so it's like a family member or another worker that you might work with at your place of employment, like whoever is legitimately allowed to be there is allowed to let the police in. Okay, we also have stop and frisk. So officers can stop if they have reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. If the officer reasonably believes the person may be armed, he can conduct a frisk. So what this is basically a pat down of outer clothing. So evidence like received under these pat downs may be seized based on plain feel, and passenger compartment of an automobile can also be searched, limited to areas in which the weapon may be.
All right, so is there any questions based on? Yes.
Spoke about if you, outside your home, if you are stopped, they ask for your ID. Are you required to give your ID or your name or identification?
So I think that was part of the stop and frisk one. So if the police do have reasonable suspicion that you've committed some type of crime, yes, I would provide your ID. That way you could clear yourself, and because then they could pat you down and see if you have anything on you.
How do you know if there's a reasonable reason for them to stop you or search you? Should you ask for their supervisor or just simply for no reason just give your ID?
So typically what you would have to, they would have to believe that you have committed, that there's some type of criminal suspicion that's going on. Typically they can't just say, oh, this guy is just walking by and he looks suspicious. I know that this is the law, right? We're just talking about the law, but the way it's practiced is a little different. But what I would try and do is try and be as honest with them as possible. So if they do ask for your ID, I would try and just say, this is who I am, and this is why I'm in this area, things like that. That way, they don't believe there's any type of more reason to suspect you of anything. Does that make sense?
If they are actually doing racial profiling, because let's say you're a Muslim,
Yeah.
like Muslim or you have hijab on, so are you just by doing that just agreeing them to profile us?
You know, I think that's a good point, because I think that part of that is that the way that the law is practiced versus the way it is just on the text is different. I would say that when the police do try and stop and frisk you for your own safety, you should try and comply, because we do have to remember that we are Muslim. We do have an element of racial profiling that happens against us. And the police have a lot of authority and a lot of latitude to get the items, to get the information that they want. And so for your own safety, I would say that I would try and just comply with what you can. Does that answer your question?
So let's say, Brother Azam is stopped and frisked, and these officers said I have reasonable suspicion of you, and then later Brother Azam calls care because he feels like he has
I would say at the same time, like, you should call CARE because we could call the police department, and I would also ask for their business card if they have it, whoever this officer is, and that way we can file something with the police department moving forward. But we do have to understand that while racial profiling might not be, how do I explain? While it might not be, it is very intrusive to us, correct? Because we are the ones affected. Unfortunately, stop and frisk is something that was codified by the Supreme Court, so they do have that power. So we would have to understand that, like, moving forward as well. So while it is one thing that we could file a complaint with as CARE and as advocates and as representatives, I don't know moving forward how effective that would be. Yes.
Is it advisable to record the interaction whenever we have interaction with law enforcement, if they're coming to your home or stop in the vehicle, just to record the interaction? Do you have the right to record?
Yes. Yes. All right. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So just a quick review. Without a warrant, that means you're not required to talk to or consent to a search. If the officers do have a warrant, make sure that they show it to you before conducting the search. And the warrant must be shown to you in a reasonable amount of time. If you are arrested, you do not have to talk. You can invoke your Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. You can ask for an attorney immediately. You also have the right to an interpreter if English may not be your first language. And remember, before you say anything to a police officer, nothing is really off the record. So, with that being said, like, remember that I don't know if we've all seen Law and Order, but I know it's a popular show. They say, remember, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. So that's one of the things that we should remember before self-incriminating yourself. So that kind of leads into the Fifth Amendment, and that is the privilege against self-incrimination. So, like I was just saying, from Law and Order, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to the presence of an attorney, and if you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed. And this is for criminal proceedings. And so when you do invoke your Fifth Amendment, remember, you want to say, I'm invoking my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. Explicitly say that. And so after that, they will not be able to continue questioning you. They have to respect that. So we have a little skit that we're going to do. I'm going to invite our two interns up to do this. And we're going to simulate. So we're going to simulate a scenario.
Okay. Guys, I'm going to be the officer's situation, all right? Hello, I'm Officer Khan. Put your hand behind your back so pretend you're right.
You didn't knock on the door.
Oh, wait, no, we're not doing that one.
We're not doing the house. We're doing the arrest one. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, right? Okay, so you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court, or you have the right to the presence of an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed. Okay? And I have a few questions for you, Fatima. Where were you today?
I won't speak without an attorney present.
Please?
I won't
right to remain silent.
Oh, and I have a right to remain silent.
So, along those lines, that is what you're trying to implement. Yes.
So it's important to note that when law enforcement comes to your door, unless they are about to arrest you, they're never going to almost, they're never going to tell you that. Let's say,
Yes.
agent comes to your door, they're not going to ask you your right to remain silent or anything like that. So if you start talking to them, they identify, you ask for their identification, let's say they are police or the FBI agent,
Mm-hmm.
and you start giving your geographic history and everything else, they are recording everything. So
Yes.
before you start speaking, that's when you should say a good idea point to have if you want to speak to them. And they may even tell you, no, we're just going to ask you something else. You can still repeat that you would like to have an attorney present.
Yes.
And again, like you mentioned in your initially, that's extremely important oftentimes to have an attorney because you may not remember things right.
Mm-hmm.
And if things conflict at a later date, that can be like a criminal offense.
Exactly. So, I think one of the most important things to remember is also the timing of these amendments. So remember that your Fourth Amendment is before you're arrested. Fifth Amendment is during your arrest. So, just to add on to what you said.
And if somebody, an officer comes in, and it has happened to many of us, and you simply, an officer comes in and you are, as a good Muslim, very hospitable and say, oh, come to my home and whatever, invite them for a cup of tea. I mean, you don't necessarily have to do that, but once you do that, they can come, they're at your home, and whatever they see, whatever. So
Yeah, and I think, we've all seen a movie or two where, you have someone who's in your home and then they start like looking around at, X, Y, and Z. So they can't just run up your stairs and search for stuff, but, things that they see that are in that plain view exception that we saw earlier, they could see that. So just try and protect yourself and take these steps, I would say. So, thank you. Yes. Do you mean do you just want to talk to them through the door? I mean, you could say you could just not answer, I guess, yeah. But they will probably come back and visit at another time. And chances are they probably already know you're home. That's just,
if they have a warrant, of course they have the right to get into your house. But you're not obliged to speak to anyone without an attorney's consent.
Yeah.
If somebody is knocking, you don't want to open the door, you don't open the door. But if they actually have a warrant and they want to force themselves in to do the search, they have the right to do so. But most of the time they don't have a warrant, they want to chit chat with you and you simply may choose to have an attorney present, so you don't have to open the door.
exactly. Just open the door, man. And open the door, ask for the warrant. If they don't have one, just say, come back with a warrant. I would say a noise complaint would be more so based on the local, your city's ordinance, and so based on a violation of that, they would be able to come to your house. Does that make sense? So we're gonna go into voluntary interviews. So what happens when you're asked to meet with an officer? You also meet with an officer for an interview. You have the right to say you don't want to be interviewed. You also have the right to an attorney present. You also have the ability to set the time and the place, try to find out the questions that they're going to ask beforehand, and then only answer questions that you feel comfortable answering. So if they ask you something that's off the wall, you could say, I don't feel comfortable answering that question, or instead of even saying that, say, if they continue to ask you these off-the-wall questions, ask for your attorney and say that you do not want to be interviewed anymore. So if you're stopped by the police, make sure that you keep your hands where they could be seen. You don't want to be accused of pulling out some weapon. Like if you go to your glove box, they might think that there's something dangerous, especially as people who are Muslim individuals that are being stopped. They're going to be more likely to perceive people like us as a threat. So make sure you keep your hands on the wheel. Show them your license. I don't even think you need to show them registration anymore, just your proof of insurance. And then you don't have to consent to a search, but if they have probable cause to think that something is going on with you, they're going to be able to search your car according to the automobile exception that we talked about earlier. And you could also indicate clearly that you do not consent to a search. And then, like we said before, even if the officers say, you stand over there, and try and question you, you still don't have to answer any of those questions, and you still have the ability to seek legal counsel for those questions. So remember, if you are arrested and taken to the police station, you have the right to remain silent. Even if you're arrested or detained, you can clearly ask for a lawyer and your one phone call until one is provided. And if you cannot afford a lawyer on a criminal charge, the government has to provide one. So if you are being arrested criminally, you have the right to a public defender who can assist you in legal counsel. And so another thing is, even if they say, if they're interviewing you and they say, oh, well, your lawyer's on the way, do not talk to them, do not talk to the police until your lawyer's there. They might say, oh, like your lawyer is an hour away or something, because they might have spoke to your lawyer previously or your public defender. But it's important that if you're sitting there in an interview, you don't speak to them without that legal counsel. You don't speak to them without your legal counsel with you. Yes. Yes. Don't answer that. Excuse me? They have a lot of authority to lie without getting in trouble, whereas when you're arrested, say they've arrested you for a robbery and they start asking you questions and then you lie, you are going to get in trouble for that, because that can and will be used against you. So what I would recommend is, we have to understand that they have the authority in this situation. So what we really need to do is try and speak with your counsel, as well as even if they seem nice and they seem like they're your friend, do not speak to them without assistance, because they can lie. And if they're, for whatever reason, if you are in a jail cell and there's someone who is next to you and that is an informant, and you don't know they're an informant and you're talking to them about details of your case, I know it sounds like something that doesn't happen often, but this does. If you're talking to this person in your cell about things that are going on in your case, and that is an informant, they can use that information against you as well. So once again, if you're contacted by DHS, which is the Department of Homeland Security, or if you are not a citizen and are contacted by DHS, you have the right to an attorney. It's always a good idea to have the contact information of an attorney on you. Don't sign anything without reading it, understanding it, and knowing the consequences of it. That goes to anything that happens in deportation, that goes to any type of plea deal. Anything that you need to sign, make sure you read it and you understand it. If you do not understand it, ask for an interpreter or ask for an attorney who can understand the information that's being presented to you. You don't want it to ever sign something and you're signing away your rights. It's like any type of contract. You always want to read it and make sure that you understand what is going on. So we're going to talk a little bit about the consequences for immigration. So what that may be, I'm going to let you guys read it for a second, but I'm going to emphasize some of the key points. You may be deported. You may be declared ineligible for citizenship. If you have a green card, it may be revoked. If you're applying for a green card, it can get denied. Or if you are not a U.S. citizen, you could be barred from re-entry. Let me see. So what are the things that could put your immigration status at risk? Typically, these are called crimes of moral turpitude. What does that mean? It's just a fancy word, for whatever reason, to say serious crimes. Usually, the law tries to make simple things very complicated, so just think of these as serious crimes. So if you've committed a serious crime within 5 years after being admitted and you're convicted of that, there's grounds for deportation, or 10 years for a legal permanent resident, which means a green card holder, that could make you eligible for deportation. And so a conviction for 2 or more serious crimes, these need to be convictions, not just indictments or charges against you. A conviction of any aggravated felony, drug offenses, firearm offenses. What other things can put your immigration status at risk? These would be convictions of domestic violence, stalking, child abuse, neglect, as well as violation of a protection order, say your spouse or someone that you know, you guys may be in a rocky place and for whatever reason they have a protection order against you. If you violate that, it could be grounds for a deportation. So just be aware. So what are your options? Depending on your immigration status, it might change the route that you want to do. Ideally, you want to have the charges dropped because there's not enough evidence to convict you. That means pretty much say that you are guilty of this. You could have a plea deal, which means that for whatever reason you started off, say that you're arrested for an armed robbery, and then they get you for stealing. You're actually convicted of stealing a pack of gum for some reason. That would be a plea deal, because the armed robbery is here, stealing the pack of gum is all the way down there. So you do have to be careful, because sometimes a misdemeanor or a lesser crime could still affect your immigration status. So what you really need to do is, before you take any type of deal, make sure that you consult your attorney to see how it's going to affect you. Or lastly, an acquittal by a jury if you seriously believe that you might not have done the crime, and you're able to go to trial and be found not guilty, you can avoid a conviction. You will not be, your immigration status will not be placed at risk if it's just a charge against you. Rather, just convictions are the things that are going to affect you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, so say I'm from overseas and I got married and moved to the U.S. and I had a child with my husband, but we're in a fight, so I take the child and cross over state lines to stay at a relative's house. Can I be charged with kidnapping and be deported?
That is a very interesting question. Can you repeat the question, please?
Okay, so let's say I'm from like overseas and I got married and moved to the United States and I had a child, obviously with my husband, but we're in a fight. So I take my child and cross state lines to stay at a relative's house. Can I be charged with kidnapping and can I be deported because of this?
You know, you're never really prepared for a question, and then you get this question. And I would say yes, especially if you're traveling over state lines. That would seem like a serious offense that could affect your status, as well as things like it would bring kind of this first bullet point into question. Because this could be child abuse based on whatever state that you're in. Kidnapping would be a serious crime that could put your immigration status at risk. But you would also have to consult with someone who is specialized in family law that would kind of know that.
So people can get in trouble for kidnapping their own child.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so that would violate their status here in the United States.
That is a crime that I cannot say 100% for sure, because I was not prepared for you to ask me about kidnapping your own child and then running away to California. But I would say that it would likely affect your immigration status, yes. Does anyone else have another question like that? Just Fatin.
Stories I've heard.
All right. I hope they're okay, whoever that was. So this is a hypo that we have. We pulled it from something that we did in the past. So Bill is a lawful permanent resident, which means he's a green card holder, and he makes a credible threat to kill his ex-wife, Carrie. As a result, Carrie is placed in actual and reasonable fear for her safety. Bill pleads guilty to a misdemeanor. He receives probation and anger management classes, but no jail time. However, because Bill threatened to use physical force, he could still be deported. So, as you could see, in these misdemeanors, and based on domestic violence and threats against your potential partner, this could really affect your immigration status. It's a very slippery slope. And so, what should you do if you're a non-citizen and you're arrested by an immigration officer? If you have children with you, you can ask for a family member or friend to pick them up and care for them. Make sure you assert your rights. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. You have the right not to sign any papers waiving away your rights. Remember, it's always important to read, understand before you sign anything. Claim asylum if this is a possibility for you. If, for whatever reason, you or someone that you know is here illegally and then they are caught by an immigration officer, asylum might be one of the last options that they have. So that could be one of their last options that they can try and invoke. Remember that the job of an immigration official is to enforce, and they're not going to be able to advise you of all of your rights. Can I explain asylum? It means that, say, I'm from Palestine, and say I actually Palestine's not a good example. Palestine. And I came here on a student visa. I've overstayed my student visa. I was supposed to leave last year, but I'm still here. My family had political activity in Palestine, and so based on that, it is unsafe for me to go back home. That means that I've filed an asylum claim here in the hopes that I'm able to stay here because I have a fear of persecution based in my home country. And so, based on that protection, I need to stay here because the only other alternative for me is going home, and I'm likely to face serious bodily injury or death if I return home. Does that make sense? Exactly. Exactly. And you see this a lot coming out of, I would say, in the Middle East, I would say Syria, probably Yemen. You could also see this being a possibility in a lot of Latin American countries, like El Salvador, maybe Guatemala, places like that. Exactly. So those are asylum hotspots, I would say. Yes.
In your example, you said that you came here on a student visa. Let's say you came here illegally. Can you still claim asylum?
It's a little bit more difficult. In that case, I would recommend you to see a specialist, someone that would know a little bit more than me, because you would have a little bit more of a trickier time trying to claim that. Usually, it's hard if you're applying for asylum, but you've came here illegally. So, yes.
So when you say you have a right to attorney,
Yes.
that's only in case if there's a criminal charge against you, correct? But if you don't have a right to an attorney, per se, for an immigration issue.
You do.
So the court will assign you an attorney, you can provide attorney if you are being
That one is a little bit more difficult. I know that there's the federal public defender that you could potentially go to, but I would say usually if you have, usually if you're in immigration proceedings, you might already have an attorney, especially.
The government is not obliged to provide you an attorney.
I would say that I would definitely consult with the federal public defender because you're in immigration proceedings because that is a federal jurisdiction issue. So, yes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there are other nonprofits who may provide you legal assistance, organizations like
Catholic Charities is one. There are. Yes. Exactly. So I can't remember who asked before, but when you are entering the country, your rights are limited when it comes to searches. So the Fourth Amendment does not apply at the border, and this applies for citizens and non-citizens because of national security. And even with a valid visa, you may still be denied entry into the United States. Eventually, they will have to let you in, inshallah. So yes, questions?
Now, as far as the searches is concerned, I guess there will be some debate into that issue, but
Yes.
if they are a home and the home is locked, you don't necessarily have to unlock your phone, is that correct?
They can seize it, and there might be a lot of pressure for you to unlock it. They're definitely not going to be nice about it if you choose not to, but they can seize your items.
But you're not obliged to unlock your phone.
It's a difficult question because it really depends. I don't have a concrete answer for you, so I'm sorry about that. So I'm going to have our other intern present the next slide about airline passengers and TSA policies.
Assalamu alaikum. All right. So basically, I'm going to discuss the TSA policies and everything when it comes to traveling. So basically, we know that for Muslim women, we're permitted, or we have to wear hijab or niqab. It may come to the point where you have to, you're required to have additional screening, including a pat down, and they may require you to remove your hijab in a private area. You have the right to ask for a woman, obviously, to do this for you. And then you will be provided a screener of the same gender unless extraordinary circumstances. So and this link down here just has you file like a complaint for any kind of discrimination you may face when going through TSA. Is that it? Oh, I thought there was more than one slide.
No.
Oh, okay.
So with this link, it is for the FAA discrimination complaint. So if you do face discrimination at the airport, you're going to want to file one of those complaints.
At the border, which we enter the U.S. and I'm being questioned between, at that moment, can I call for an attorney or call CARE or call you from the airport or tell the agent that you're asking for an attorney?
So It is going to be harder at that point because you don't have the Fourth Amendment at your disposal. But unless they're arresting you, typically you wouldn't need an attorney. Does that make sense?
You are being detained for hours, let's say. When you're coming in, you are waiting for like 4 hours or whatever. And the question is, you can reach out to parents. I know that others have done so as well.
So, so if they do put you in questioning, like intensive questioning, you can, I would say that you can request an attorney at that point.
So, in terms of asking, answering questions, let's say you are in Palestine or whatever, you're re-entering the country, are you, and you're a U.S. citizen, are you obliged to answer questions like which mosque did you go to when you were overseas and all those kind of questions?
So for those, and you said you are a U.S. citizen?
Yeah, you're a U.S. citizen, you're re-entering the country and you're being asked what kind of questions in terms of your religion or
So for that, one of the things is that they can ask you those questions and they can hold you. There are specific guidelines on when they need to alert a local authority that because we'll say this is not the correct time, but say at 2 hours they have to alert the local authority and then they have to at another threshold they have to alert like state authority and then the attorney general of the state, things like that, based on your questioning. So most of the time they're not going to question you for that long because they don't want to go through those intensive procedures. If they do, it's still really hard because they can search pretty much, they have that authority to search you without a warrant. And you're not really, you can request an attorney if you have one, but it's still going to be hard because their power is going to be limited because you're at a U.S. border. Does that make sense?
yeah, in the sense that the questioning cannot be unreasonable, right? Like questioning about your faith or questioning about things which may not be relevant. So at the border, does a U.S. citizen basically lose all their right and they have to answer everything quickly? Then
Unfortunately, they lose a lot of their rights, is what I'm going to say.
you are not obliged to answer. Like if they say, what's your bank account number or whatever it is.
They cannot, they would not be able to ask you for your bank account number.
I have a question, Vice President. Have you, the hold you, how long they hold you? Have you had experience with the holding in airport?
Yeah, there has been a lot of cases where
No, no.
Muslims.
Yourself.
No, no,
You.
no, I'm not saying not personally, but a lot of Muslims
From,
have been sent from.
I've been in the airport for 6 hours one time. 6 hours.
once.
Yes.
Right. You
Single
have,
time.
yeah, you have like long flight, 10 hours flight, and you have the extra headache in border, but especially if you want to get your lawyer, as you said, the attorney, it will take longer than you expected, right? Better to answer the questions and they're gonna release it, right? What's your from experience? Better to have your lawyer
That's
or
why
answer their question? What's the best options?
the question was like very simple, and it took me like 15 minutes. But then I been waiting in the room, separate room, because they have like, it's like cage areas, There is a section that for people that come and go like quickly. Section. I was in there like.
So have you had a chance to call your attorney or to call your lawyer? How?
I don't know. I was just waiting there for 6 hours.
For no reason. So what's the best option? If you call to your attorney, it will take longer, right? Or
I would,
try to extend your time. They try to pressure more, I think.
I would say they probably will try and press you more, because you know when you start to cooperate with some of their questions, and they're not going to be extremely intrusive, but they might ask you a weird question here or there, but for them, they probably will get scared if you do request an attorney. And that's when they would start asking you more intensive questions, and it might actually be longer.
I mean, bottom line is, as a U.S. citizen, we have certain rights. You know, if you are already living, you're visiting, they can turn you back. But there have been incidents where this be much more profiling. So at the border, they would turn back Muslims who were American citizens. They would not let them in. And CARE has often intervened on their behalf and brought them back after a year, 2 year, whatever. So bottom line, we should all know we are not no different than any other U.S. citizen. We have certain rights, and yeah, when you are going overseas, they would want to know where you were or whatnot. But when it gets excessive, I know of cases where CARE attorneys have intervened many times when they were harassing Muslims re-entering. They have reached out to CARE attorneys, and then right after that, they let them go right away. So, I mean, yes, you comply, but when it becomes profiling and whatnot, you have to be careful.
I mean, and it's really it really depends. Sometimes, like he's saying, if you do request an attorney, they could be like, oh, and they'll back off. And then other times they could say, oh, what are you hiding? And then question you more.
From my experience, I had a 3 years non-stop airport check, just like this brother, because of that incident, you know, what happened in 2017. So I asked from my lawyer, attorney, which is here, and I asked, they didn't remove non-stop 3 years,
Really?
which is, yeah, when you flying back to the States, they keep you ask same questions.
Mm.
So after 3 years, then this checkup is disappeared.
Really?
Right.
We can, should have a name and number of attorney.
No, no, even we approached our attorney, the email, they write it down letter, but it didn't help.
Can you? Oh,
So this is like if you're an American citizen and you're stopped at the border, like is this what we're talking about?
yes.
And you want to get back into the United States, at what point, like, does it stop being just like regular questions to like where you think, okay, wait, I need to call an attorney because what if I accidentally say something the wrong way and it's taken a certain way? Like, how do we know when it's the right time to call an attorney?
I would say that I don't want to assume, but we've traveled like back into the States and they've asked, you know, basic questions. Usually it goes like this. Where'd you go? I went to Canada, for example. Oh, where'd you stay? Toronto. Are you bringing back anything illegal, anything more than $10,000? And then you say no, and then boom. If it is going beyond that and they're asking you more invasive questions, that's when you might want to question whether you should seek an attorney. Sometimes they may say like, oh, we want to search your bag, things like that. And obviously that might not be as invasive to warrant a, you know, attorney or things like that. But yes.
This is just a statement. All the airport and travel all over the world, they all ask you questions. I don't understand what's the deal with the questions. Because the airport, you go to England, they ask you. You go to Paris, they ask you. If you go to Damascus, they ask. Any airport you go in, they ask you questions.
sometimes it could be a little invasive, especially when you're being held for so much longer.
If you're held for so much
Exactly.
longer, they do that, especially if you're traveling in a country that provide a visa for you. They can hold you there until they decide that to let you in or not, or they send you back to your country. So it means because they're Americans, born and raised in America, but for the people who are traveling with visas, it's slightly different, whole different perspective.
Well, actually, Sister Julia, I feel like I know this case. She was traveling, she went to Canada with her daughter just for a weekend trip or something. And she's American born, right? She's American, parents are American. And she was coming back from Canada, and at the border, they arrested her. And in front of her, like, I think her daughter was 4 at the time. And I don't know what happened after that, but like she was basically, they had to put her on the watch list. And so like this can happen to anyone just because, depending on the political climate, it might end up being more than just regular questions when you're traveling, right? So inshallah this never happens again. I think we were over that whole thing where they're like racial profiling Muslims.
But how many cases do we have, like curious cases, people happens to them often? This is not often. We're talking about a rare case. We're not talking about, because airport, I experienced a lot. Airport have to ask you for you. What are you coming? What do you have? What do you have in your bag? What did you bring? Did you buy something from other people? Did they give you items that you're not supposed to bring? So you ask them about that. Long question.
I mean, I think
I think
like
you
you're
have
right
been
about
the
airport.
whole by especially like half brother like me. I think
No.
you handle it experience. If you handle it few times, then you say, oh, what's going on?
Yeah, but in general, they may ask questions, some questions before you entering the vessel or the airport. So you have to
But
ask.
specifically special room, that's
No, no special room.
that's
Well,
problematic.
if,
You don't want the
you're
long
there,
journey.
if you're there inviting you to interview, it means so they have a specific question for you. So you are in a list. So
Watch
they,
list.
yeah, they have to ask some questions to be sure. So the country is safe.
All right,
I
I'm
think
gonna
when it
hold
happens
on.
so randomly selected over and over again to be extra search at the airport, then we have a problem. Then it isn't, you're not randomly selected, you were chosen for some reason, and then you should investigate why, right? So
I agree.
that happens a lot.
Yes.
Yes, this workshop is to know your environment, not like what you want to do or what you feel like doing. A lot of times it has happened like an officer shows up in the door or FBI and whatnot. The first thing Muslims at hospital as they are, they invite them in their home and have some tea and coffee.
Mm-hmm.
That may not be the best thing to do. You can check on the ACLU website, let you know, I don't know if it's in their website, what your right is as a U.S. citizen or a immigrant when you enter the border. But certainly if you are a U.S. citizen in general, what I'm reading, they cannot deny you not entry because of you.
Eventually, they will have to let you in. So I'm going to. I think this is a really interesting discussion. I kind of want to. I know we're a little short on time, so I'm going to try and power through the rest of this information. And so, this is your legal right as an employee in the workplace. So federal law makes it illegal for an employer to discriminate against an employee on the basis of religion, race, national origin, and gender. You can request reasonable accommodations, and if your boss or your employer does not accommodate reasonable accommodations, that could lead to employment discrimination. They also need to demonstrate fairness in hiring, firing, and promotions. And so this also means that you have the ability to be able to work in a non-hostile work environment. Your employer must ensure that you are not subjected to insults based on your religion or your national origin, or harassment or excessive attempts to proselytizing means trying to convert you. So you should also be allowed to complain about discrimination without the fear of being fired, retaliation. And if you do report discrimination and you are then fired after that, you can file a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and they will launch an investigation into that. And so what is an example of a reasonable accommodation? So this is a case that CARE Ohio worked on in the past. So CARE negotiated an accommodation whereby the employees would be allowed to pray on a scheduled break, and the company agreed to adjust break times to fit with prayer times. Your employer does not have to provide accommodations if it is an undue burden. What does an undue burden mean? It means that the company will suffer financial loss from the accommodation. So if you are for some reason costing your employer millions of dollars because of X, they would not be required to accommodate that, even if it was a religious practice. Usually, as Muslims, I would say 90% of us, 95% of us don't have enough to rise to a financial loss. And a company is going to be allowed to enforce safety measures, such as here. They told a Muslim woman that she can't wear an article of clothing because it could get stuck in a machine and cause injury. That would be something that they do not have to reasonably accommodate. And so if you do have an employment discrimination claim, you're going to want to file it with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission within 300 days for a federal employment discrimination claim. There's also, in Ohio, we have our own specific Ohio Civil Rights Commission, which you would file within 180 days. So always, what you're going to want to do is always document everything that happens, because once this commission starts to investigate, it could be a whole year down the line, and these events might not be fresh in your head. You're going to want to save all the emails. You're going to want to save everything to help document this investigation moving forward, and just shift over the information to them so it's all easily presentable. So what you could do when you're faced with job discrimination is ask to be transferred to a different department. You can ask for mediation. You can contact CARE or an employment attorney to help file a complaint immediately, and we may be able to advocate on your behalf, as well as contacting those two agencies. So under those general guidelines, always remember witnesses who might have experienced the job discrimination. Make sure you report the incident immediately, writing everything while it's fresh in your head, and you're going to want to document all that information. And so that kind of brings me to the end. I know I kind of sped through those last couple points, but I want to respect everyone's time here, and I'll be here so you can ask me questions. This is my information and my email, as well as our office. And if you want to continue to support CARE's work, you can donate to our organization. Or
I'm passing out these pocket
also have my contact information here. I have my own business cards. So if anybody would like one, I can give them one. Yeah, of course. So that kind of just concludes everything. Thank you all for coming. I do appreciate it. Thank you for your questions as well as comments. I was almost worried coming here, like no one's going to have anything and all the information is going to go over everyone's head. But thank you guys so much, of course.